This is the Private Investigator Experience podcast, and I'm your host, Phil Little. I never dreamed that in early 2002, I would find two men in suits standing at my office door saying, Mr. Little, your country needs you. 9/11 was still fresh in my mind, and my past work in the Middle East was always considered when strangers appeared at my door with a message a little strange, too much like a movie. My instinct was to be cautious. For in my past, I'd been on a PLO hit list that had been broadcast over the Middle East. The two men at my door, they could have been school teachers, bankers, insurance sales. One looked to be probably in his late 50s and the other maybe late 60s. In the few seconds I had to analyze the two men in front of me, my guard went down as the threat level seemed to be low, that they had come up from my past to fulfill a threat. As they entered my office, they showed me government IDs. And the younger one said, We have learned you had some assets on the ground where we don't. He again said, Your country needs you, and we have suitcases full of dough. With a little smile, I said, Are you planning on making some bread? They laughed and said, Our dough is green. That caught my attention. Over the next few hours, I spent time with him. I was playing hard to get. You can't afford me, guys. Even though I had decided from their first words if I could help my country, I was in. We talked about specific needs, which I will not discuss in this forum. And as the meeting concluded, we had agreed on a way forward, which would revisit my background and update the security clearances I'd had in the past. Before we go further, could I ask for your help? Would you like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell for future posts? That would really help get the message out to more people. Let me digress. This meeting didn't happen in a vacuum. Many years of preparation had led me from the farm in Missouri through the military, law enforcement, private intelligence, and a detective agency to be prepared for the knock on my door. Today's post starts with my journey from the farm in Missouri to traveling the world looking for terrorists to stop before they get to the U.S. Let me just comment. I don't care what profession you might be in, what job you might be in. Preparation is the key to success and bigger things in your life. So prepare. Take today as a day of preparation. Learn, study, apply yourself to whatever profession you may be in to be ready when the knock on your door comes. For if you prepare yourself, the knock will come. My life of discipline, work ethics, was formed from my early farm life, where at 5 years old, yes, 5 years, I was helping with milking 15 cows by hand, feeding the hogs and the cows. And my Saturdays were very focused from noon until about 5 or 6 o'clock. We had to get the chores done early because that was the only way we could go to town on Saturday. We lived about 10 miles out of town. Going once a week was a highlight for a young child. My farm life was hard, cold winters, with temps as low as minus 50 degrees with the wind chill. But it was in these first 17 years of my life that helped shape my character. Learning that work ethics, discipline, and hard work brought results. I also developed a desire to not make mistakes, so I would push myself to do things right the first time. I'm grateful for the opportunity to have grown up in farm life. As I approached the 18, the military was looming over me. We still had to draft, so date myself here a little bit. I had a couple of choices. Wait for the draft and spend 2 years in the Army, or sign up with the Air Force for 4 years. I chose the Air Force. I liked airplanes better than tanks. My biblical worldview that I talk about started in these early days of my childhood, having parents who were devoted Christians who lived out their faith. My family was a musical family, and I was singing in church by age 10 and leading choirs in my teens. One of the two major events in my military days was when I was ordained in the ministry, and the second, getting married and having my first son arrive. My work in the Air Force was with jets, where I started training with B 52s and then got transferred to fighters as we were ferrying F 100s to Vietnam. After getting out of the Air Force in Victorville, California, considering full time ministry, but I was led into the business world and law enforcement. Over the next 10 years in law enforcement, my interest in intelligence gathering started. And when I left law enforcement, the opportunity came to start my intelligence files. I was encouraged by a mentor, the police chief of Buena Park, California, to be consistent in developing my intelligence files. He said they might sit for years, but at some point, those intelligence files would be valuable. I was operating a one man PI firm, not unlike the TV shows on the PIs you saw at that time. I mean, you would see them occasionally filming on the streets of North Hollywood in front of my office. My favorite was watching Mannix, the private eye of the time, one of those. And he would be in fights out there on the street with some bad guy, and he wouldn't get one hair of his head messed up. I thought that was pretty cool. I had a few part time agents. And then when the opportunities came for me to take over West Coast Detectives, it was founded in 1922 in Los Angeles. This gave me a national platform with hundreds of employees. Now, the events that brought the two men to my door started to build. An important meeting happened at the church I was attending, San Fernando Valley, California. One morning after church, George Otis, the head of High Adventure Ministries, came up to me and said he would like me to get involved with the ministry and go on the next trip he was taking to Israel. He took tour groups multiple times a year to visit the Holy Land. And after talking with my wife, we decided to go on the next trip. My introduction to terrorism and all its evils was going to start. Little did I know that saying yes is the reason I am now doing this podcast and talking about my life experiences. That saying yes is the reason the knock on my door came saying, "Your country needs you." Let's go to the beginning of my Israel experience. Dateline Israel, 1977. On my first trip to Israel, I fell in love with the country and all it means to Christians. We visited all the holy sites around the country. And when the 10 days were up and we were headed home, I knew I would be back. A few months later, we were headed back to Israel. And on this trip, I would be exposed to events that would lead me to want to know more about terrorism and where it came from. My first book, Hostile Intent, tells about that journey of my search to find the source of terrorism, and it shows and relates some of the adventures I was on in the Middle East to find that. The first event which shaped my understanding of the strength of Israel was in an event that I observed. I was in the Old Town, and there were demonstrations going on when coming down this hill was a large group of hundreds of people marching and shouting. My eyes went to the young soldier who was 500 feet from me. He walked out into the street and stood facing the oncoming crowd. He had an assault weapon on his shoulder, no rank showing. As the crowd got about 50 feet from him, he just extended his hand like this, one finger pointed to the ground. I took that as a signal to stop. I wasn't sure what the crowd was going to do, though. He just there stood still with his hand, pointing to the ground, and I held my breath as I watched the crowd grow closer. At about 10 feet, they stopped. Time stood still. The chanting stopped. And for about 2 minutes, it was still. Then they began to disperse. This was Bible time when this young Israeli stopped hundreds with just a motion of his hand. I knew I had witnessed the hand of God over his people. But this wasn't the only exposure to the events that was going on with international implications. It was customary for the leader of our group to meet with the prime minister when we went. This was late 1977, and the prime minister was Menachem Begin. In that meeting, he asked if we were aware of what was happening in southern Lebanon. Our leader said no, so he told us. Southern Lebanon was a Christian area. And the PLO, now this is the Palestinian Liberation Organization. This was an organization that was the first of these organizations that started the fight to try to eradicate Israel and move Israel out of the Holy Land. It has now been replaced by Hamas and Hezbollah and some other jihadist groups. The PLO had overrun and was slaughtering the Christians in southern Lebanon and had shot up most of the towns. Israel had intervened and pushed the PLO back north of the Litani River. And they'd set up a safe zone with Major Haddad of the Lebanese army, who was in charge of the south with Israel's help. He then said, "Where has the Christians of the U.S. and Canada been?" He then said, "You should go up and meet with Major Haddad and see what is going on." He didn't wait for a yes or no. He just said, "I will have a plane in the morning to take you up." And he told us the airport to be at, the time to be there. The adventure begins. The first adventure was on a small single-engine prop, six-passenger plane. The pilot was a young military pilot, but he showed his skills. He was sitting in the right seat. We were going along at about 5,000 feet as we headed north to the border with Lebanon. About 40 minutes into the flight, we suddenly made a dive for the ground. I was looking straight down out of that cockpit window, looking at the ground coming up fast. I looked over at the pilot, who gave me a little smile. He said, "You were in the Air Force, right?" When I was sure we would hit the ground, I saw a small dirt strip in front of us. And he touched that plane right at the start of the runway. A Jeep was waiting to take us to the Terrorism Hotel to meet Major Haddad. Now, the Terrorism Hotel, kind of infamous at that time, it was about a 50-room hotel. And the rumor was that at any one time, half the rooms were filled with spies from all over the world trying to find out what was going on and what was going to happen on that border between Israel and Lebanon. But there were some more surprises to come. When Major Haddad arrived in a convoy of 5 Jeeps, he stepped out looking like he came from central casting. That's a Hollywood term, if you're aware of that. And he was in a pressed green military uniform and green cap. We talked for hours. And he said at the end, "Would you like to go into Lebanon and see some devastation and stop at his house and meet his family?" Oh, we said, "Yeah, sure. We'd love to go to the war zone." We immediately said yes. We'd forgot it was a war zone. And I was about to have my first experience with flying missiles coming at me. Never had that when I was in the Air Force. We went through the good fence. That's a story within itself again, a good fence that a gate was put in the fence so that Lebanese people who needed medical care could come to that fence in the morning. Israel would open them up, let them in, give them free medical care. They were helping take care of the Christians. We headed north towards Beirut. About 5 kilometers north, run right across the ridge above the Litani River. It was down in a deep gorge. And it was a big river, but from where we were at, way up above, it looked just like a stream down there. And then when you looked up on the other side was Beaufort Castle, which had been there since the 12th century. It was now occupied by the PLO, and they were shelling northern Israel every night from that castle. We were about halfway across the ridge when the driver of our Jeep said, "Look out, incoming missiles." And I thought, what did I get myself into? I looked to my left and saw the trail of missiles, and the driver laughed and said, "Don't worry, they aren't guided, they always miss." And the fact that I'm talking to you here today, yeah, they missed. This was a common practice for the convoy of Jeeps. For the PLO, when they would see these Jeeps, and what they were doing is we went across the river, the Jeeps with Major Haddad started in front. And then in little ways they would pull over, just weave over, and the Jeeps would pass, and he would move back into the second or third, and he kept moving positions in the convoy. Well, they knew that he was in those, so they wanted to try to take him out, and they were always firing missiles, but they didn't have guided ones at that time, thank God. We visited the shot up towns, met his family, and left southern Lebanon with a commitment to build a radio station for the major to be able to communicate with his people. Now, how this came about is that's a story within itself. Some of that is in my first book, Hostile Intent. Little did I know that this event would lead me to more very interesting adventures. I continued going back to Israel, both on trips with groups and with George and engineers in the planning for the building of the first radio station in southern Lebanon. The Voice of Hope radio was coming soon to the airways of the Middle East. There were many things that happened during that time. President Carter at that time, his State Department ordered us not to put the station in and to stay out. We just ignored them though. During the building of the radio station, many noteworthy events happened. No time to tell them all. A couple came to mind. We had the support of Israel for building the station, with orders from the Prime Minister to the military and hardliners in the government that this Christian radio station was important for Israel both in defense and international politics. In the months and years after this meeting, I witnessed the reality of terrorism and learned that it was an international problem, not a regional one just in the Middle East. I saw records from the terrorist training camp, which had lists of people from all over the world, including Americans who were trained in the camps, sent back to America and their home countries to be prepared for terrorist attacks when activated. Also, I saw the evidence of Russia and the KGB as trainers and promoters of terrorism. The record of the KGB being involved in the forming of the PLO and placing Arafat in the leadership role. And digging into that is for another report. After we finished building this little radio station, which turned out to be a 50,000 watt, which went on the air in 1979, with the towers in the Valley of the Springs, just about 2 miles inside southern Lebanon. We built a TV station later on with the towers north of the Israeli border, about 5 kilometers towards Beirut, and near the road across the Litani River. The TV towers were very exposed by the location, which was near where the PLO would still patrol, particularly when they saw a vehicle in the area. I had some experiences with that later on. One event during the building of the radio station and putting in the towers happened at a cement company. We needed cement for the tower base. We went to the cement company, the only one in that part of Israel, and we said we need cement. But they informed us that Lebanon was a war zone, they wouldn't deliver there. We had a problem. We went back to Metula and told the commanding general of the Israeli forces, and he said, get in a jeep. We went back to the cement company, and the general told the owner, pointing to 4 trucks, and said, these trucks are in the army. Load them with cement. And he put soldiers as drivers and delivered the cement to the tower base. So we had a radio antenna up. This is one miracle out of many during the building of the station. The second event that I will share out of many was the TV station towers. George called me one day and said he was worried about the security around the towers, being alone up on the hill above the Mediterranean Sea. He asked me to put together some early warning security systems and take them to Israel and install them. The first thing I said to George was, how am I supposed to get this equipment in my luggage through Israeli customs? He laughed and said, pray. I said, all right, I do that, but I'm still concerned. Well, he gave me a number of our military contact in case they wanted to lock me up when I got there. Although I was aware that I had a way to avoid jail if I got stopped, I got nervous on the plane. I prayed a lot. I stood out because I had 3 large suitcases, normal for tourists coming in. When I got to the x-ray station for incoming luggage, I took a deep breath. I said, here it goes. As the luggage started through, there were some distractions. Friends, it doesn't happen in Israeli security. Number 1 went through. Number two went through. Number three went through. I was shocked. I quickly put the bags on the cart, headed for the door, waiting for the shout to stop. It didn't come. In another post, I'll tell about a similar situation I happened going into Riyadh a few years later, and a similar experience. With my knowledge growing about terrorism and its international connections, I decided that it was only time before it would hit the West and the U.S. West Coast detectives had a national presence, and I concluded we needed an international one. So this started the building of my private intelligence network. It would take a book to talk about it all, but I'll just give you the summary. I started in Paris with some family connections at the French National Police. I established a station in Paris. Paris connected me to England. I built a station there. While on a trip to Europe prior to the 1984 LA Olympics with a law enforcement group, and it was called the Interpol Connection, we were studying prevention for possible terrorist attacks at the LA Games. During that meeting in Germany, I met with the co-founder of GSG-9 in Germany, who became my station chief there. And after he retired, he continued running our operation until his death in Germany. When cases took me to Hong Kong, I made contact with the retired head of CID for the Hong Kong police, who became my station chief and introduced me across the Far East, where I set up stations in Bangkok and Singapore and Malaysia. Also had operations in the Philippines. During this time frame, also, I was connected and started working with the Latino Police Officers Association out of Los Angeles. That got me involved in Mexico, led to my recruiting a head of station for Mexico and Latin America. My focus was on all the stations was getting human reports or ground reports from humans. For those that might, human is a term used in tradecraft. Twice a month, I had given them a request, and then I just asked them to give me the latest activities in the country. I received all kinds of things, including political stuff. When we needed ground operations, they would have staff with local personnel to support our mission. During this time, I was doing a lot of television on news, talk shows, and had stories written about our agency. I hosted a radio and television talk shows in Los Angeles for several years. Our agency, with all the publicity, became known nationally and internationally, bringing magazines and television stations across the world to do stories on us. That was a short story. And how the knock came to my door in 2002. As we now know, my thinking in the late 70s and early 80s that terrorism would at some point be in America was a little before my time, but unfortunately it did occur. I learned a lot from the knock on my door to today about our world and all its problems. I have worked in the big, beautiful cities, run down dark alleys and hot spots of the world, and been thrown into environments with people in heartbreaking poverty and dictator rule. One thing I have learned from being in so many different countries with different backgrounds, their customs and beliefs, is that we have many of the same hopes and desires for our family. We aren't that different. We maybe look different, speak different languages, but inside we want the same basic things for our time here on earth. As my journey continues, I will be sharing more of my journey about my life, wrapping investigations with intelligence to bring about knowledge that will keep us safe. It is with superior knowledge that we will win a war against evil. I've been blessed in these many years. I'm a Christian, not ashamed of it. I've got Israel all over my background, I'm not ashamed of it. And I wound up in Riyadh with an office in Riyadh for several years, working out of there where Saudi Arabia became one of our biggest partners in counterterrorism. But they accepted me. They knew about my background as a Christian and with Israel. One of the royal family members had told me, he laughed and said, Phil, we got back doors to Israel. We talk to them all the time. So there's a lot more that I can't talk about in this one because of time. As we end this part of the journey, We'll pick it up later with some of my experiences about keeping our country free. What do you think about the status of our world? I'm thinking about it right now. The supposed peace agreement in the Iran conflict. I'm really concerned that our world leaders really don't understand what the issues are. You don't negotiate with terrorists. You don't negotiate with people that want to destroy you. I understand politics. I don't like war. I don't want war. But wasn't that recovery of our pilot amazing? We've heard some amazing recoveries over the years from Israel and Mossad and how their special forces have recovered kidnapped victims and other missing people. But this one was put together by such a large group of military assets and people. It was fantastic to watch and to see it happen on Easter. That was amazing. We have a lot to be proud of in our country. What do you think about all this? Do you agree with me or not? I'm not trying to change you to my way of thinking. What I want to do is challenge you to do your own investigation. I found these things out through investigation. Yes, I had some time on the ground, which gave me good insight. But you can find out exactly what is happening and not be led astray by misrepresentation and total lies in the press. It is amazing to me how politicians, and yes, it's happened on both sides. Right now, it's rampant on the left, lies right to our face. We know it's a lie. We know it's a lie. They keep doing it over and over again. What do you think about that? Are you willing to get involved? Are you willing to stand up, sort out the truth, then declare it to everybody you can, starting in your own local community? So let me know what you'd like to hear about or like to see happen. Do you think there is hope we can push back on all the attacks in our own country to take away our freedoms of speech, Second Amendment rights, religious freedom, have good education for our children away from indoctrination and gender confusion and all the other lies? Please leave your comments on any of the platforms. Or you can email me at pi777 at gmail.com. Now, you might have a problem in your life, and it might be anywhere in the world. We have assets all across the world. We just finished a major operation in Hong Kong and Shanghai with people on the ground that did an amazing job. Across the whole Far East, we have assets on the ground in other places in the world, as well as here in America. So if you have an issue in your business or family, one who could get a private investigator help me or an international group with these connections. If so, send me that in a summary. You can do that by key little pi 777 at gmail.com, or you can call me on my private cell phone, 818 262 1312, and I'll be happy to take your call and answer any questions you may have. Again, would you help me by liking, sharing, subscribing? You know the drill. Hit that notification bell for future posts. We'll have some more parts of my journey later on. Until next time, be safe. May God bless you, your family, and may God bless America.